12,800 years ago, humanity made a mistake so massive that it erased our most powerful food source, and no one alive even remembers it. But here's the twist: this isn't fiction. It's history we've buried under concrete and cornfields. Picture a world where carrots had more protein than steak, and spinach packed more iron than a blacksmith's forge. That world existed, and we threw it away. Now imagine this. You wake up one morning and the air feels like someone forgot to turn off the ice age. It's 15 degrees colder overnight. That wasn't just a fluke. It lasted 1,000 years. Glaciers crept like giant white monsters across continents. Rain dried up, and plants that had kept human beings alive for generations simply vanished. The logical outcome? Extinction. But at one lonely bend of the Halaf River, modern-day Syria, group of survivors refused to die quietly. The people of Tel Garuna did something utterly insane. While most of humanity was scrambling for berries, they fought the dying earth with farming. Archaeologist Henry Marsh and his team dug up clues showing over 100 wild plant species growing side by side. Not by accident, but by plan. This wasn't garden variety experimentation. These early farmers weren't planting, they were programming evolution with sticks and flint knives. They bred wild rye with seeds the size of marbles, protein content that would make your local gym junkie cry, and drought resistance that puts our modern crops to shame. These weren't cavemen. They were bioengineers in loincloths. And they weren't finished. This was Earth's first agricultural revolution, born not from luxury, but from survival. And the results? Absolute genius. But now things get weirder. Jump forward several millennia to the eastern woodlands of North America. Here, indigenous farmers weren't just growing food, they were crafting an empire of plants so advanced it makes today's monoculture farms look like a kindergartner's science project. Most people think native agriculture was just corn, beans, and squash. That's like saying the internet is just email. The secret weapon? A plant with possibly the dullest name ever, swamp elder. But behind the name was a prehistoric power food with oil levels that would make sunflowers feel insecure, and enough protein to ruin quinoa's career. So why did they stop growing it? For nearly 2,000 years, the ancient Mississippian farmers cultivated this beast of a crop across thousands of miles, and then it betrayed them. One year, it starts feeding your civilization. The next, it's giving you hives, asthma, and feels like you're being poisoned by salad. Every harvest turned into an allergic apocalypse. It was like Mother Nature created the perfect food, then rigged it with a booby trap. So they quit. Not because it wasn't good, because it was too good. It evolved to defend itself. Right next to swamp elder grew another miracle plant, Duckfoot. It wasn't just versatile. Its seeds were packed with protein, and its leaves were like prehistoric kale, but better. Then there was upright bindweed, a plant that, when grown with Duckfoot, created a farming system 20% more productive than growing either one alone. They didn't just plant crops. They created a living machine that adapted itself to weather, pests, and time. And at the core of this system, a weird little plant called spiked barley, tougher than a survivalist on espresso and designed to endure droughts like they were light rain. Spiked barley wasn't just another plant, it was a lifeline. It filled the hunger gap when winter stores were gone and summer crops hadn't arrived. And it thrived in dirt so bad even weeds gave up. High protein, timing perfection, and pure survival fuel, and we dumped it. Why? Because corn promised more food per acre. That's it. Quantity won, nutrition lost. Sustainability? Gone. Climate resilience? Who needs that when you've got fields of carbs? This was humanity's first version of the Green Revolution, and just like the modern one, it chose mass production over actual nourishment. The result? Crops that look great in photos but are about as nutritious as packing foam. When researchers at the Yoram Grotto analyzed ancient barley from 6,000 years ago, they were stunned. Compared to today's grains, it had 73% more protein, 82% more iron, 90% more calcium, and 47% more phosphorus. Basically, ancient grain was Superman. Today's grain is Clark Kent, stuck in a basement with vitamin deficiency. Now consider Amaranth the sacred grain of the Mexica civilization, a miracle plant that makes modern grains look like fluff. It packs 14% protein, double what corn and rice manage on a good day. It's the only grain that naturally contains vitamin C, and it has a full set of essential amino acids. The leaves are medicinal. The plant is practically invincible. So what happened? Spanish invaders didn't destroy Amaranth because it was useless. They banned it because it was powerful. Too powerful. It represented independence, nutritional, and cultural. So, for 400 years, they tried to erase it. Meanwhile, as we fret over droughts and rising temperatures, ancient farmers already had that stuff sorted. Take pearl millet in West Africathis. Grain could laugh in the face of drought, thriving in dry, sandy soils where our modern crops would curl up and die. It didn't just grow, it endured. Stored for 5 years with no chemicals, it was nature's food bank. Then there's teff, developed in the highlands of Ethiopia, a grain richer in protein and fiber than brown rice and capable of growing from sea level to 4,000 meters. These crops didn't flinch at 32-degree temperature swings or rocky, unforgiving terrain. They just kept feeding people. In China, 8,000 years ago, early farmers cultivated foxtail and broomcorn millets that matured in 90 days. That's a whole month faster than most crops today. When the monsoons failed or the temperatures went haywire, millets still delivered. They were early warning systems and emergency rations in one. But here's the wildest part. These farmers weren't planting just one thing. They created something called Maslin fields. Different grains, one plot. When drought hit, the tough plants took over. When weather was good, the high-yield crops dominated. The field adapted. It responded to the environment like a living algorithm. The result? 20% higher yields than monoculture, plus natural resistance to pests and diseases. These weren't random planting choices, they were biostrategies written in soil. Right now, as you're watching this, entire vaults of lost agricultural tech are sitting in museum storage rooms. We're talking literal treasure chests. 4 million plant specimens at the Burke Archives, 170,000 more in Yale's forgotten cabinets. And inside them could be the DNA code to feeding the planet. Here's the part no one really wants to say out loud. Scientists have basically figured out how to resurrect the dead. Not zombies, something even weirder. We're talking about crops. Entire species of plants brought back from genetic extinction using ancient DNA. Think CSI, but with carrots. And what they're uncovering is unsettling. DNA extracted from 8400-year-old wheat at the Sadal Oyuk dig site in Turkey shows traits that modern wheat has completely lost, things like natural drought shields and pest resistance built into the genome, like hidden armor. But that's just scratching the surface. With compound-specific isotope analysis, researchers can now examine how ancient plants actually functioned. We're talking about metabolic cheat code show. They soaked up water, pulled nutrients from garbage soil, and laughed in the face of locusts. This isn't archaeology anymore, it's crop engineering via time travel. And it's being used right now to build climate-proof plants using something called de novo domestication. Translation: they're using gene editing to speedrun what ancient farmers took thousands of years to perfect. Now here's where it gets genuinely freaky. Out of the 7,000 edible plant species on Earth, humans only domesticated around 200. That's right, we left 6,800 potential food sources untouched. Imagine walking past the cure for famine for 10,000 years straight. Evidence from the pre-domestication era shows something even stranger. For over 1,000 years, early farmers were deliberately growing plants that still looked wild, like totally indistinguishable from weeds. But they weren't random patches. These plants were being pruned, spaced, and harvested with methodical precision. That suggests a kind of cultivation so advanced, we can't even recognize it in the dirt. And they didn't just farm locally. New findings show ancient crops moving across entire continents before they were even fully domesticated. Bronze Age trade routes, 3,500 years ago, connected communities thousands of miles apart. These weren't just trading spices, they were swapping seeds, techniques, and agricultural secrets like prehistoric LinkedIn. The scale of innovation rivals today's global farming systems. But then comes the question no one wants to ask. Why did we abandon these systems? Why walk away from crops that were better adapted, more nutritious, and more sustainable than anything we grow now? The answer? It wasn't a failure of farming, it was erasure. Colonial powers destroyed indigenous food systems, not because they didn't work, but because they weren't European. Amaranth wasn't outlawed because it was weak, it was banned because it empowered native populations. People were literally executed in Spanish colonies just for growing it. The eastern crop networks in North America weren't replaced because maize was superior. They were bulldozed to make room for colonial trade models that favored wheat, barley, and rice. Plants like swamp elder, duckfoot, and spiked barley didn't vanish, they were erased, systematically, in favor of European-compatible crops. Even the so-called Green Revolution of the 1960s made the same trade-off. More food, sure, but at what cost? We sacrificed genetic diversity for mass production. We swapped nutritional density for shelf stability, and we traded environmental resilience for the illusion of uniformity. What we're left with is a food system that looks productive on paper, but behind the numbers, it's fragile. Our food system today is built on a fragile fantasy rose of identical crops, all genetically cloned, dependent on chemical lifelines just to stay alive. They can't handle climate stress, and they're losing their nutrition like a leaky bucket. But here's the plot twist. There's a growing movement to reverse this disaster. All around the world, researchers are piecing together the lost wisdom of ancient agriculture. One key player is the International Paleobot Group, a global team that sounds like something out of Jurassic Park but for grain. They're decoding prehistoric farming tricks using machine learning, sifting through charred plant fragments like it's an AI-powered treasure hunt. Some of these forgotten crops are already sneaking back into our diets. Quinoa went from mountain survival food to smoothie bowl celebrity. Ancient wheat varieties are showing up at artisanal bakeries, where people care more about flavor and nutrition than shelf life. And slowly, Amaranth is regaining ground as people realize it never should have been buried in the first place. In the US, the National Science Foundation is throwing nearly $1 million a year into digging up the roots of agriculture literally. Europe's top research councils are funding major efforts to understand how prehistoric farming spread across the world. The idea is simple but powerful. Our best future food might be hiding in the ruins of the past. Modern science is accelerating the revival. Genetic editing can now recreate lost plant traits at warp speed. DNA from ancient seeds is being used to steer breeding programs. Isotope analysis tells us which plants were the water-saving champions. Morphometric mapping shows us how ancient grain structures differed from the weak sauce stuff in stores today. And here's the truth that'll make you look at your salad in a completely new way. These crops didn't disappear because they were bad. They disappeared because politics, colonization, and economics crushed them. Amaranth and quinoa weren't rejected. They were suppressed. Indigenous farming systems were sidelined because they didn't fit the European export model. And during the Green Revolution, we sacrificed health, adaptability, and resilience just to pump out more wheat per acre. Now, with climate change heating up, soils breaking down, and malnutrition on the rise, those ancient crops suddenly don't seem so outdated. They survived ice ages. They thrived in deserts. They fed entire civilizations without chemical fertilizer or irrigation systems. They didn't fight nature, they cooperated with it. The most incredible part isn't that these crops once existed, it's that we were clever enough to create them and dumb enough to let them vanish. The only question left is whether we're finally smart enough to bring them back. When archaeologist Laura Edson uncovered those blackened seeds at the site of Tel Garuna, she didn't realize she was holding a survival plan for the 21st century. But inside those charred grains were the genetic blueprints for how to feed a planet that's running out of time.